Reactions have trailed the recommendation by foreign ministers of Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger to create a confederation as part of a long-term goal of uniting the West African neighbors within a federation. Mali and Burkina Faso, ruled by juntas who seized power in coups, rushed to back Niger's military rulers when they ousted elected President Mohamed Bazoum in July. They created a pact, the Alliance of Sahel states, setting up closer economic ties and mutual defense assistance if the sovereignty or territorial integrity of a member is threatened. In a joint statement following a two-day meeting in Bamako, the foreign ministers spoke of the great potential for peace, stability, diplomatic strength, and economic development that a strengthened political alliance offers. Now, Mali's foreign minister, Abdoulaye Diop, says the conclusions will be submitted to their heads of state who are due to meet in Bamako at an unspecified date. Now, to further discuss this, we are joined by David Otto, a public affairs or political affairs analyst. Hello, David. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
All right, now looking at how these three countries have historically interacted and the existing relationships between them, what are the potential benefits and drawbacks of creating a confederation between Burkina Faso, Mali, and also Niger?
Well, I think it's important to understand that these three countries, first of all, have shared a common border, known as the Liptako-Goma Triangle, and of course, we also know that historically, these three countries have been ruled by military junta in the backdrop of the military coup d'etat that occurred in Mali in 2020 and 2021, of course. The two military coups in Burkina Faso in 2022, but of course the one military coup in July 2023 in Niger. So we have military juntas that exist in this country. So I think the idea of forming a confederation perhaps could be beneficial for these three nations in terms of enhancing on the former or the previous, what we call the Liptako-Goma Alliance, which was signed, the so-called Sahel Alliance, which was signed between the three countries as a mutual defense and security pact, against any armed rebellion or against any external aggression. So I believe that the idea of creating a confederation maybe is to do with some kind of enhancing political and economic integration in the backdrop of defense, diplomacy, and perhaps, development. These three countries are facing an existential threat from the regional bloc which they belong, known as ECOWAS. So if they are to be suspended as they are, as members of ECOWAS, then of course for the purpose of survival, I think that the establishment of this confederation is to try and cushion the impact of this suspension from ECOWAS. So perhaps it's an advantage for them to not just collaborate, in terms of military, as we know of the Sahel Alliance, but also to collaborate in terms of economy, which of course will give some oxygen to the economy to perhaps, blossom in the midst of chaos.
Okay, now, David, you did talk about the pact that was signed by these three nations, to protect them from, outside aggression. But then in light of the current political conditions, how will the Confederation impact issues such as governance? You've said a bit about security, but how about governance and socioeconomic development in these regions?
Well, this is going to be, the devil is in the details. This is a preliminary thought. The idea is that there will be a common, fund that will be created by these three nations, and then of course those who will be involved at the operational level, we'll have to come up with a roadmap, in terms of how, this can be beneficial from an economic or perhaps a diplomatic perspective. But I think that, the first is at the strategic level where, all the presidents, the heads of state of all these three nations will have to ratify that, a confederation, should be established, which of course is within their rights, as sovereign states, irrespective of what, befalls them in terms of their history. But I think, at the strategic level, the heads of states, would have to agree, and then you have to bring in the technocrats, to work out on, what, areas to focus on from an economic point of view. What are the shared benefits? First of all, I think, perhaps, they might create some kind of a free movement of people within the three states, if that doesn't already exist. They might reduce, perhaps, taxation or, so there are a number of things which, perhaps would be a subject of discussion, at the points of where the technocrats would, would go to work. At this point in time, we're looking at a political statement by the foreign ministers. That has to go through, again, as I mentioned earlier, on to ratification by the heads of states, and then, of course, the economists, and the those who are in charge of these sectors will have to go to work. But we're still at the early stage. But I can see the reason why this confederation has been established, because, of course, all the three nations have been suspended from the economic community of West African states, which means they cannot trade at this point in time with ECOWAS, or perhaps, they have limited, trade, import and export arrangements with ECOWAS. So,
all right, well, David, still on that.
They want to survive.
Still on that, you're talking about trade. The ministers have actually emphasized as well the importance of diplomacy, defense, and development to consolidate political and economic integration. But how would, the creation of these confederation impact the relationship with neighboring countries and the international community at large?
Well, I think it shouldn't. In my experience, alliances anyone can create a bilateral alliance or, a triple alliance as the case is, at this point in time, and perhaps, other members, could join them. There is nothing wrong in creating an alliance. I think as long as it can be sustained. Of course, you have the United Nations, you have the African Union, but you still have, ECOWAS that exist. You still have BRICS. You have the G5, the G7. So countries can decide in the interest of their mutual benefit to establish whatever alliance they wish to establish. This is part of freedom of association.
Well, you did talk about the G5, and I don't know if you actually heard the news that Burkina Faso and Niger Republic have actually said that they would quit the G5.
Of course, so if they are quitting the G5, perhaps it's because the G5 was established by France, and all these three countries, have a very, very adverse relationship with France, since they asked the French to leave their territories. But as you rightly pointed out, the G5 was created irrespective of the fact that you had the existence of the multinational joint task force. Many political analysts had argued that there was no need to have the G5. But again, as I mentioned earlier, countries are free to establish alliances. Whether it's the G5 or the multinational joint task force, or even BRICS or whatever you have it, ECOWAS, IGAD. So any group of nations, that believe and agree that, they see some mutual benefits can decide any day or any time to establish a confederation or an alliance. This should be well understood. But as you rightly said, there may be some head scratching going on between within the ECOWAS, bloc, because of course, they will be thinking, are they leaving us permanently? And what impact would that have? Should any other ECOWAS member, feel like to join the new confederation? So is this some kind of a collapse of ECOWAS? Are these cracks, major in terms of the survival of ECOWAS? But for now, what is clear is that the foreign ministries or ministers of these nations have made a suggestion. We're still waiting for the heads of states to ratify this. So right now, we're just in a speculative mood. But I don't see any impact that it would have, in terms of, to a state where it will not be established, as long as these countries, stay determined.
All right.
They're free to do so.
Yes, indeed. All right, well, thank you so much, David Otto, for your time and also your perspective on this issue.
Thank you.